Hi everybody, I'm back for another book review. It's been a while since I've done a proper book review on this channel, so today I'm pleased to present House of Stairs by William Sleator. I'm deep in the reads and I'm about to review the bejesus out of this book. So William Sleator was a popular young adult science fiction author who wrote a ton of novels between the 70s and his death in 2011. House of Stairs is one of his first novels, as well as one of his most popular. It's about these 5 teenagers who suddenly find themselves in this infinity room with no ceiling or floor or walls. It's just an endless labyrinth of stairways that branch off from one another. The only landmark is this machine that will feed them if they figure out what arbitrary command it wants them to do. Throughout the book, the orders from the machine become more and more elaborate, and the tensions mount as the characters do whatever it takes to stay fed. You also get these hints throughout the book of the dystopian world that exists outside of the House of Stairs, as well as hints about the characters' background, which inform the way that they behave while they're in the room. Despite having a very simple writing style and a basic premise, this was a pretty engaging story. It's not really one of those sci-fi novels about exploring a futuristic new society or learning about technology. It's more about just throwing characters into a weird situation and just seeing what happens with them. So the characters in this are quite archetypical, and they're like tropes you've seen a million times, but as the story progresses, you learn just enough about their past to understand why they're behaving how they do, and their facades begin to slip as the story pushes them to their limits. The problem is that some characters in this are better realized than others. The most fleshed out characters here are Peter and Lola. Peter was especially interesting because he's very withdrawn. He's always daydreaming about the one time in his life where he had a friend who was affectionate and understood him, and he's basically motivated by trying to find someone else like that in his life. Lola, on the other hand, is the stereotypical mean girl, although as the book goes on, she gets rounded out pretty well. And then on the other hand, you have Blossom, who is easily the most one-dimensional character here. At first, she's interesting because she's the only character that comes from privilege, and that privilege manifests itself in various ways. She's the only one who trusts authority figures. She expects there to be a certain pecking order, and she expects herself to be at the top of that order. But it's not approached with any subtlety at all. She's basically a cartoon villain from page 1, and it's made all the worse by the fact that she's a big girl, and the author makes sure that you never forget that, because every description of Blossom is paired with a very derogatory remark about her weight. And look, I understand that when you're depicting societies where a lot of people are starving, big characters are often shorthand for greed or excess, or, think of Baron Harkonnen from Dune. But it's just done in such a pig-headed, mean-spirited way in this book, and since this book is trying to take some of the psychological themes fairly seriously, having this very cartoonish depiction of a chubby girl is it undermines the story's message. Aside from my problems with Blossom, I thought this book did a pretty good job with its themes. We look at how a person's conditioning and upbringing either protects them or makes them more vulnerable to the influences of the machine. Going deeper than that, we also see how people living under tyranny are often forced to participate in their own oppression, even being pitted against one another. And, in our own society, countless people are forced to work in these degrading jobs for minimum subsistence, and they know they can't really do anything about it, or they might starve, so they just put up with their own exploitation, similar to how the characters in this book just put up with the machine's demands because they need to stay fed. The author is also clearly interested in the cruel psychological experiments of his time, such as the Stanford Prison Experiment, the Milgram Test, or the Harlow Monkey experiments. Not only is he working with and playing off of the findings of these experiments, but he's also clearly critiquing the people who set up these experiments in the first place and how they often target marginalized people. There's a lot you can read into this book, and its subtle critiques of various, like, social structures. So yeah, House of Stairs has a lot going for it, but as I've mentioned, it's not without its weaknesses. I said earlier that the writing is very basic, and unfortunately it's so lacking in style, and you get the impression that it was written so quickly that there's really not much atmosphere here. Like, as soon as the characters find the machine that feeds them, the setting becomes completely arbitrary. You forget about the scale of the place that they're in or the weirdness of it, and you're just focused on like a couple of flights of stairs with like one machine. The other thing is that, you know, a lot of time passes between scenes, and for a book that's short as this one, that's totally fine. But the author doesn't account for what's happening in between the scenes, and you get the impression that the characters barely talk to each other off page. They don't seem to form bonds like you would expect if as much time was passing as this book is saying. So little things like that kind of pulled me away from the story and made me feel just how much stronger this would be if it were fleshed out a bit better. Which apparently I'm not the first person to think that, because this book has been adapted into a play in the past, and I just found out that they're currently working on a movie adaptation. And in my mind, books like House of Stairs are the perfect books to adapt, because they have all the solid building blocks of a really good idea and story, but they're missing some of the finer tweakings and fleshing out that something like a movie could bring to the table. So when that movie comes out, I'm definitely going to check it out. The last thing I need to mention about this book is that I was not a fan of the ending. I mean, it wasn't the worst thing in the world, it was still enigmatic enough, and it left you with a decent amount to think about, but it's anticlimactic, what can I say? I was reading it and I was just like, what? That's it? It didn't have enough guts, I felt. And I think it was too trite and on the nose, even for a book written for teenagers. You know, it's still a decent book, and it's very short too, so, you know, it's worth picking up for like a couple hours of reading. It has a lot of interesting themes and ideas. It just has a few issues with characterization and execution. So I'm a bit mixed here. I'd give it like a 6 out of 10, and yeah. That's my review, guys. So, have you read anything by Will Sleator? Have you read House of Stairs? Apparently this guy was quite the hit with teenagers back in his day, so if you read him when you were younger and he left an impression on you, please let me know. I'm very curious about this author. But that'll have to do it for this time. I'm done with another video, so I guess I'll be back whenever I feel like making another one. See you later.